Welcome to Now Serving a Side of Therapy, your intro guide into the therapeutic world. Together, we'll explore various aspects around how to show up for ourselves and others by tending to our own mental and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. Welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving a Side of Therapy, a client's intro guide into the therapeutic world. Today, we are joined with Marissa Soares. She's a licensed clinical social worker who is bilingual in English and Spanish. She's earned a master's degree in social work and has not one, but two bachelor's degrees, one in family social science and another in sociology of law, criminology, and deviance. All of this is derived from her passion for social justice. Her therapeutic work is grounded in a holistic, person-centered, and strength-based approach that is both anti-oppressive and trauma-informed. Throughout her career, she's had the privilege of working with a diverse range of clients, such as Spanish-speaking families, couples facing marital issues, youth in the foster system, and individuals with severe mental illness. She believes that each of us have a unique lived experience that makes up our own worldview and that everyone deserves to feel heard, seen, and accepted. Welcome, Marissa, to this week's episode of the podcast.
Thank you so much for that beautiful intro. That sounded really lovely. I'm so happy to be here. I do feel really passionately about being able to spread awareness about some of these topics that a lot of people often shy away from because they're not easy to talk about. You know, it's difficult to talk about experiences of pain, traumatic experience, scary things, heavy things. But I also think it's really important to, kind of bring these topics to light to kind of reduce some of that fear and stigma about what's happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, in this episode, right, we're going to be talking about trauma and suicidal ideation when working with minors. And I know that you have a huge, extensive work background in supporting clients in that area. And when we think about trauma, we can, we like to define these terms, right? When we're mentioning them. And so trauma is like, it's a distressing and overwhelming experience, right? That can cause emotional and mental effects on people. And it also has an impact on the central nervous system as well.
Yeah, and it's so much more common than people think, right? A lot of times people are afraid to reach out to others because they don't want to be a burden or they don't want to look weird or strange for experiencing something like that. Whereas a lot of my work has heavily focused with intensive cases. For instance, children who've experienced DCFS, CPS reports, child abuse, or experience psychiatric hospitalization for suicidal ideation, or also some youth that have probation for committing various crimes as well. So I have worked with intensive care, 24/7 emergency crisis response. And really, what I've seen is that some of the most important things is to show that you care, right? First of all, and show that it's that you're not alone in this, right? Being able to reduce those blinds from what is going on around it can be so helpful for connection, as well as really being able to see that change is possible, right? So a resource that I have that is really fascinating for understanding trauma is this book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a little bit intense. It's definitely not something that you would probably read in one sitting, but it's extremely informative with regards to how our bodies react to trauma. Okay, so a lot of people think that it's all just in our heads, when really there's physical changes that happen after somebody experiences chronic stress, somebody experiences fear, right? And it also differs if it was a one-time event and somebody was able to find safety right away versus if this was something that was prolonged and somebody experienced maltreatment or fear for a long period of time without being able to find support, or maybe try to reach out to somebody and was dismissed. So that will happen a lot with cases of child abuse, unfortunately, sometimes sexual abuse. If there's somebody in the home, a caregiver, possibly maybe boyfriend, husband, father, or whatever the case may be, might be sexually abusing a child. And if somebody tries to reach out, and if the parent is not able to provide support in that moment, or doesn't, or tries, or whatever it happens and it continues, then that's going to have a much bigger impact on brain chemistry. So according in The Body Keeps the Score, it explains much more how chronic stress actually increases cortisol, right? And this cortisol can actually act as acid to the hippocampus, which is where our memory is stored. So this makes sense why a lot of people who've experienced trauma actually have memory loss, are unable to pick up details with a specific storyline, specific timeline, can often show up with brain fog, can often show up with confusion, right? And having these things showing up in a social setting might look, different, might look, somebody might, if they're not aware of what's going on in the background, if they're not aware of what somebody's experienced, oftentimes will also then get bullied, unfortunately. That's another huge thing that goes on with the lack of awareness of traumatic experiences, that oftentimes people who are experiencing this will show up in ways that are often made fun of. And that's another huge, problem with regards to lack of awareness, and then how we can improve, social supports in schools as well.
Yeah, so when we talk about working with minors in this way, right, a lot of them aren't able to recognize like this is what's going on for them, right? And so, like you said, if they're already had exposure to this, stressful event, and then they didn't feel safe, right? They felt powerless and unsafe. And then they have other people teasing it for them too. They're not able to voice what's going on for them in a particular way, right? Like adults can. So what does that mean? It comes out in behavior, right? Through this, and for example, with suicidal ideation, right? So that behavior is expressed for a reason, right? There's some underlying things that are going on, and that may be like trapped inside the body, like you said, right? And that the client does not know how to express. This is the only way they know how to express it, right? And as you're talking about The Body Keeps the Score, for anyone who might need a little another way of thinking about this, if you watch the movie Inside Out, right, they have the core memories, right, that are stored inside our body, whether they're the happy memories or the sad memories, right? And those memories that are stored inside us, it's like, okay, well, in this particular case, if we're thinking about trauma and how that equates to SI, right, during those moments of challenging situations, did we receive the love and support that we need? If not, then that's going to make a particular imprint on us and carry with us, because it's made this imprint on us. So even though the situation may have happened, some time ago, it can still affect the way that we are functioning and behaving day to day, and it can affect our relationships as well.
Absolutely. Think of it as like a watchtower in your brain. Somebody is looking for trouble. Somebody is looking for danger, right? Watchtower seeing, is this situation dangerous? Is this situation safe? And all of that chemistry in the brain shifts after experiencing something traumatic, where your body no longer feels safe. Responding to certain stimuli might be responding to what actually happened in the past versus what is currently happening right now. The reactions are coming subconsciously. It's not something that a lot of these people have control over initially, especially, reacting to something, having hypervigilance, fear, looking around, right? These are some of huge, well-known symptoms of PTSD, particularly, but being afraid, feeling on edge, alert, anxiousness, and angry outbursts, kind of that emotional impulsivity, are things that happen because the watchtower in our brain has shifted to feeling like everything is dangerous.
Yes,
Everybody's
on
out.
hyper alert, right? Like you said, and
Mhm.
always feeling constantly on edge. Yep.
Mhm. And it doesn't even have to be from, a near-death experience. So a lot of people think, I like to separate trauma based on big T versus little t. So big T is kind of that near-death experience, right? Sexual abuse or car accident or physical violence, things of that sense. But really, trauma, our brain is impacted by little t trauma as well, which is that emotional abuse. Other things that happen that might seem more complex, might seem a little bit smaller, but can still impact our brain just the same, depending on our stress levels in the moment. It's almost like that window of tolerance as well. How big was our window of tolerance when we experienced that traumatic event? And how easily were we able to cope with it in that moment? So all of those things play a role as well for how people perceive trauma and how it shows up. Some other examples of how it shows up with minors, as you mentioned, suicidal ideation, fighting in school, uh, getting, being not following the rules, for instance, not following the rules at home, getting into arguments with siblings, parents, oftentimes struggling with making friends, oftentimes poor grades, difficulty focusing. So all of these things can come up. And a lot of times this leads parents to be angry with the children, angry
Or they
because
may even judge them, right, for the behavior, right? And they're thinking, oh, labeled as a bad kid, right? When really it's this other stuff going on. And honestly, like that's a large part of why we're here today, right? To talk about this is to inform, right? Like, hey, these are when individuals, especially, youngsters experience these traumatic events, how can we then be able to identify some of the symptoms that might be going on and provide some information about how to respond to that in an attuned way?
Mhm. Yes, and a huge part of my work is trauma informed CBT, but also mindfulness and awareness of this body brain connection. So, when working both with clients who've experienced trauma, but also their families, it's incredibly important to inform parents on how to respond, as you mentioned, to see that it's not just because they want to get into trouble. They're not trying to make you mad. They're not listening just because they want to. A lot of times their brain chemistry has really shifted in a way that makes it difficult to focus, difficult to follow rules, difficult to engage in regular social functioning.
And to your point, right, if there's that calcification in the brain from the trauma, right, not only difficulty, but inability, literal inability
Yeah,
to do it. You could hold them to, to like say, okay, you have to do this or you're not going to get dinner, right? It's like they're not going to get dinner because they literally cannot, they do not have access to it to do it.
absolutely. And being able to see, showing up, as I mentioned, showing up in a way that shows that you care, right? Whether or not you understand their behavior. This is often what I tell with parents is a lot of times this behavior doesn't make sense to you. It's okay that it doesn't make sense to you. You have a different experience. Your brain and their brain are different. So you're processing things in a way that doesn't make sense to them, probably. And they're processing things in a way that doesn't make sense to you. So one of the best ways is to show that you love them regardless. Asking them, what can I do to support you? I'm here for you. I'm here for you when you're ready to talk. I love you. If there was a specific incident in the home that you are aware of, that you can take ownership of as a parent, take responsibility and acknowledge, I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you in that moment. Words such as that could be incredibly healing.
Incredibly, yes, yes. Right, to be able to show that empathy. And I was thinking about it too, is like, as you were talking, it's like, yeah, what we're talking about here, right, is real, right? And it's also can be, some very difficult situations. And if we think about, okay, people that are coming from experiences of bullying or abuse or neglect, right, like how can we show up to show them, create these environments, right, that are safe and supportive and comforting and nurturing? Because then what does that do? That helps calm the central nervous system. So if we talk about trauma's impact on the central nervous system, then this trauma informed care that we're discussing can actually provide some of that calming effects, but it takes time too. It's not an overnight matter.
Absolutely. I've worked with so many parents whose initial response, it was anger to their child's behavior, anger about hearing that their child was self-harming. It makes sense also, right? I can imagine, I also have empathy for the parent of feeling that fear and that shock and saying, how could you possibly hurt yourself when I've done so much to take care of you your whole life?
Yeah, and it's not about the parent, it's about what's happened going on for the child. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've often explained, it's not that they want to. Oftentimes what's going on is emotional pain that feels so overwhelming and so unbearable. People think that they want to end their life when really they just want to end the conditions that they're currently experiencing. And so being able to see that it is possible to change their current conditions can be extremely beneficial in increasing a client's hope.
And having someone be a witness to that pain, right? Because like you said, it's the pain that becomes unbearable. And so having sometimes just having a witness to that can make a big difference.
Maybe they've tried reaching out before and felt dismissed. Maybe they're afraid to reach out because of something that happened in the past. Maybe this physical pain that they're inflicting is the only way that they can see in the moment to distract from the emotional pain.
Or self-soothing.
Self-soothing, distract, or self-soothing, or numbing of some sort of when they can't feel anything. It's being able to lean into empathy with what they're feeling, first of all, understanding with what they're feeling, and addressing the emotional pain that is going on, encouraging them that it's okay to have emotional pain, that they don't need to hide it, that they don't need to suppress it, and that hurting themselves does not need to be the solution. That there's other ways to reach out, encouraging to reach back out into support systems, encouraging that there are other techniques, for instance, being able to focus on things that you can control. Oftentimes children, especially children, feel very, as you mentioned, helpless. So many things are out of their control. So many things are managed by their parents, their schools, their teachers. But being able to lean into what can you focus on, what can you control, such as activities that you do, activities that will help you, not harm you. Activities that can improve, here's another topic, is the chemicals in our brain that can be increased physiologically from certain activities, such as oxytocin when connecting with loved ones, dopamine when completing a reward, completing a task, feeling proud. Serotonin when meditating or praying or doing something relaxing, practicing gratitude. And then also endorphins from exercise, exercising and deep laughter. So when you're able to laugh, a belly laugh, watching comedy or engaging with friends, or even eating dark chocolate is another one that increases endorphins.
That's my favorite.
So there's all these techniques. Those are kind of the behavioral interventions that I've worked on a lot with children experiencing trauma, but also cognitive interventions. And not to say that, not to dismiss in any way their trauma. I work on acknowledging that pain, acknowledging that that was not fair. You should not have experienced that. That was, you don't deserve that. And also encouraging clients that they can do things to take back their power, right? It's not about changing their thoughts, saying you shouldn't, be sad. Validating the pain, validating the sadness. You experienced something awful. And you don't need to let that past experience control you now. How can you overcome that so that you can accomplish the things you really want to in life? Oftentimes, suicidal ideation and self-harm comes from feeling that that they want to end things that are going on right now and the conditions.
Because they don't see another way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When really there are so many opportunities to change things. So being able to see and believe in the possibility of change is huge.
And that's where the support systems come into play, right? Like if that's where the family support comes in, right? It's kind of similar with substance use, right? One of the strongest predictors for successful therapeutic outcomes is like that successful family support to help people, right? So we can imagine how the family system also contributes to this kind of healing process, right? Which is why it's important, again, when we're thinking about working with minors, why it's important to include the parents in with the treatment as well.
Absolutely. So much of the trauma can be escalated from interpersonal interactions in the family. When people don't understand, when parents don't understand, when siblings make fun of you, or even from the generational trauma that the child is experiencing from their own family, learning and seeing abuse in the parents and thinking that this is okay, thinking that this is what everybody experiences. So being able to really work one-on-one with parents, work with siblings, work with the client. I've done a lot of family work as well to really help advocate for my clients' needs on more of a holistic level. So I think I see that it's very important not to just view the client as isolated from their environment, that they're somebody experiencing problems. I can't stand that term, saying that somebody has problems, when really what they're going through right now, what they're showing up as, is from their experiences, from this, either the systemic experiences, systemic trauma from the society, from rules, regulations, discrimination, all sorts of things like that, or from a familial level. Either way, everybody responds to things based on their personal experiences and the tools and the resources that they have at the time.
Yeah, and it can impact them differently too. What I've been thinking about is, again, when we kind of refer to that imprint earlier on, right? And we think about, well, how are these symptoms showing up today? If the incident occurred some time ago, it can show up different. For example, some people might have specific words that are repeated in their mind, right? Or some people might have certain images that are repeated in their mind. I know for me, for my own childhood, experiences, right? For example, for me, it's like when there is like a physical fight, like because of what I grew up around, right? I have visuals still kind of like, it come up in my mind from that. And so if I'm around some kind of physical fighting, my central nervous system is activated.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And it can be so helpful. Another piece of my therapeutic work is assisting my clients with identifying their own triggers, right? Because as you mentioned, it shows up differently depending on the experience. So some people.
How do you get kids to like identify when we talk about working with minors, right? Again,
Mhm.
being able age and developmentally appropriate to be able to identify, hey, how is this coming up for you today? What are some ways you've been able to work with minors to help them identify that for themselves?
Yeah, I can think of a wonderful story for this. So I was using a lot of imaginative practices with children. I particularly one story that comes to my mind was using action figures, creating a scene, creating a random scene, letting my client guide the story. And as it was coming around, there was a hero, there was a villain, there were all sorts of storylines going on, multiple complex storylines. But one of the themes was the villain. My client shared that the villain is a villain because her mom left her. And in this case, this client's mother had abandoned him as well. And so being able to work with his story through the imaginative practice of the action figures, being able to work with alternative endings. I would encourage, this villain doesn't need to be so angry. She has reason to be angry because her mother left her. I can imagine how hard that would be. But look at all of these other people that now she's taking that anger out and being mean to other people. Let's see what could happen. Maybe she can try to be friends with these people. Maybe she can express how she feels with the other supports in her life. Maybe she doesn't need to be a villain after all. And kind of working with that theme. So sometimes with children, especially younger ones, it can come up with imaginative practices, action figures, play, therapy, creative therapeutic interventions. I've done examples of encouraging children to draw what their family looks like as well, drawing who is included, drawing how far apart they are, and the different factors of the drawing will really show as well some of those triggers. So that's for really younger ones. I would say with more teens, are cognitively speaking, are much more capable of sharing what really bothers them if they feel comfortable with you. So that's the main thing working with teens, from my experience, is just building that therapeutic rapport, that therapeutic alliance with them so that they trust that the therapeutic space is safe to share. Because so many times teens, especially in this field, are getting in trouble, being punished, being looked down upon. So once you can show up in a space that, show that you see them, then ideally they'll be able to, and often have been able to, express those things that make them feel really scared, make them feel really nervous, and things to avoid, and how to also possibly overcome some of those fears with exposure, or shift their mindset about those fears, or see that they are no longer in danger now. So
That part is huge, right?
Mhm.
Because of the central nervous system is constantly on edge, like we were talking about, right? Helping them
Mhm.
to be able to see, okay, that's not happening now. But
Yes.
to the point too, if they do kind of remain in these environments that do continue to activate, then to your point earlier, when you were saying like there's no rest for the central nervous system to heal, right? That we can see how that might go down a different path.
Absolutely. It is very challenging to support clients that go back to homes that are very triggering. And unfortunately, that is something that is out of a therapist's control, right? We're not in the home. We're not there 24/7. We can only do our best to provide those tools and techniques during the moments that we have with the clients, moments that we have with the parents, to support their interactions outside of session.
The therapeutic space is pretty unique and different from what the client might experience day to day, right? Regarding the way that they're spoken with, right? Or again, the ways in which a safe space
Mhm.
is sought to be held for them, right? And
Mhm.
for them to be able to freely express themselves, right?
Mhm.
Like you said, that aspect of play, when we think about from these traumatic experiences, they may have gotten away from play, right? Again, because they don't feel safe. And so,
Mhm.
or because, oh, again, if safety is the first thing that comes to mind, right? Play may become secondary,
Mhm.
because again, that everything's so on such high alert. And so being able to reintroduce those aspects of play is an important part of the healing process.
Mhm. And children and teens are often not used to being heard, from what I've experienced and observed. And for me, I prioritize advocating for the teen, advocating for the child. I do actually have some personal experience in family therapy myself. When I was 13, me and my mother went to a counselor. And I remember we sat down, the therapist asked my mother, what's going on? After about 30 minutes, it felt like 30 minutes of my mother explaining the situation, when I was ready for her to ask me my perspective of the situation, she never asked me my perspective. And her immediate response was, "Have you tried taking away her phone?"
Wow, without even asking you your experience first.
And from that day, that was the first and only time I participated in therapy when I was younger. And because of that, I thought, therapists and counselors are not helpful. They don't listen. And obviously, I've changed my perspective now as I'm a therapist, but I keep that in mind. I keep that memory when I'm utilizing this person centered approach now, to make sure that that child knows that I'm listening to them and that their perspective matters. Some other techniques, when it comes to the actual communication piece between parents and families, that I find to be super useful, is the Four Horsemen from John Gottman. I know that's originally developed from marriage and romantic relationship research, but from what I've seen, also those techniques, awareness of them and awareness of the remedies, can be incredibly useful for family relationships as well. It doesn't have to be in a marriage. Anytime there's interpersonal communication, we might see some of these red flags from the Four Horsemen.
Can you describe the Four Horsemen?
Yeah, so there's criticism, stonewalling, contempt, and defensiveness. Defensiveness. And these often come up subconsciously. People often respond with defensiveness when they're feeling triggered, when they're feeling attacked, often because of previous experiences of being attacked or feeling attacked. Criticism, stonewalling is when you walk away from a situation, when you ignore somebody. It's when it actually creates a power dynamic in the conversation, where you're saying, we're going to have this conversation on my time. And that's not fair to the other person. So although sometimes it's important to take a break and take a walk if necessary, if you're feeling like you're escalated to the point of the conversation no longer being productive, if you're screaming, if things as that are happening, a break is necessary. However, it's important to verbalize that you need a break to the other person so that you remain on the same page and say, hey, I think I need a few minutes and we can finish this conversation. Hey, I'm going to go take a drive. Maybe I'll be back in an hour, 2 hours. However long you need, being able to communicate that is so much more helpful. It completely resolves the issue of somebody being left in the middle of an argument without knowing what the other person is doing, where they're going. It can often be extremely anxiety invoking, sitting there being left in the middle of an argument.
Yeah, and so when you mention defense mechanisms, right? Like we can see easily how that would come into play for adults too, right? But in this particular case, we've been kind of focusing with minors. Um, but how defense mechanisms can come up as a way of feeling safe. Again, it's always kind of boiling back to feeling safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just kind of curious, like, what are some because there are some symptoms that we can look at, right? That come up in response to traumatic events, and suicidal ideation is just one of them, right? When we think about from this emotional level, right? Has the kiddo become more irritable, right? Or have they become more socially withdrawn? Or have they increased in defiant behavior? Or has their sleep been dysregulated or their appetite changed in any way, right? Or like you said earlier, is it hard to focus? So there are definitely some symptoms that we can keep an eye out for of how trauma might be impacting individuals, because oftentimes what will happen is say a kiddo comes in for therapy and the parent says such and such incident occurred and I'm concerned for how this has impacted them and I'm not sure how. So this is how we can kind of break that down to look, well, how are they emotional, behavioral, physical, social, and cognitive levels, right? Because again, we're looking at the whole person, right? As a whole person, we're very complex beings. And so there's all these different facets of how we can look into that to see how the event may have impacted them. And in addition to all of that, I still can't help but think about going back to these kind of defense mechanisms. So I was kind of curious, what are some like common defense mechanisms that you've seen kind of present in children with SI?
Well, there's all sorts of ways to try to protect themselves, right? Shutting down, pointing the finger back at somebody else, rationalizing even is an example of defense mechanism of rationalizing why you did this because of this, and I did this because of this. Well, I did this because you did this, right? So there's all sorts of ways to kind of preserve and protect oneself. And oftentimes with families, I really emphasize and point out that it's not helpful to play the blame game. It's not helpful to say, you did this wrong. You need to change. He did this. And yes, although your feelings are valid of feeling hurt from whatever happened, we can only ever control ourselves. And so back to that locus of control, what is within your control and what is not within your control. You can control how you respond to something. So if somebody did something that hurt your feelings, you can with practice and emotional regulation skills, you can control how you respond to that situation in a way that addresses the unfair or the rude comment, but also doesn't further escalate it by yelling, or also doesn't further escalate it by placing this incident into a underlying narrative that you might have going on about this person, saying they don't care about me. They're doing this on purpose to hurt me. They don't appreciate me. So there's all sorts of narratives that people create in their mind based on traumatic experiences or even ongoing little t traumatic experiences. And being able to really identify in yourself, what are my thoughts? What are my feelings? Do I like how I'm feeling? Or do I want to change? Where did this thought come from? Right? Who told me this thought? And so that's where kind of the CBT approach comes in as well, with those cognitive, exploring the validity of your thoughts within interactions. So that emotional awareness, cognitive awareness, and behavioral awareness is huge for being able to respond to interactions in a way that doesn't further escalate an argument. And you can only lead by example. And say, well, he needs to put an effort too. Yeah, he needs to put an effort too. That's true, but you can't make him put an effort.
Again, what's within our own power, huh? Yeah, we've explored how trauma can look for different people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the importance of creating those safe, supportive environments, right? The importance of family and that healing process, and how to meet the client where they're at, right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes they're going to feel a particular way towards themselves about the experiences that they've had. And so, therapy can help kind of create that safe space for them. And how we can provide that trauma-informed care, right, through psychoeducation for the families as part of the treatment. Because, like you say, though, if it's gone unnoticed or if it's not spoken about, it will go untreated. And if we can, I originally got into therapy. One of the reasons I got into therapy was thinking, hey, if we can work with children, right, or in adolescents at a younger age and help them to identify some of these things, then maybe, just maybe, we might be able to have this kind of like intervention so that it doesn't wait until their adult years, right, to be able to start to explore some of these things and try to identify what's coming up for them. So trying to get some kind of head start a little bit, if you will, by providing this kind of very specific care, because again, two people exposed to the same situation can have very different responses. Again, it's a very big topic that we're discussing here, and lots of other different things to consider, lots of other things we probably didn't even touch on, but again, the idea here is to give some kind of initial insights and information into trauma and working with minors and how that might show up in their lives and the support that they need in order to help heal in that process.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your time here today and for having me as a guest.
Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out our next episode as we continue to explore more elements of your therapeutic journey.